Recording in progress.
Okay, hello everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. We are very happy to have you here on behalf of the Geothermal Rising Student Committee and the UND student chapter of the Geothermal Rising Student Committee. I am absolutely delighted to welcome each and every one of you to our webinar on how to give an excellent technical talk. It gives me an immense pleasure the world coming together to improve their presentation skills in the technical domain. I would like to take a moment to acknowledge our esteemed speakers for today who have generously agreed to share their knowledge and expertise with us. Each of them is an accomplished professional in their respective fields, and we are incredibly fortunate to have them guide us through the process of delivering and an outstanding technical talk. But before we proceed, let me know who will be skillfully guiding us through the agenda and ensuring a smooth flow of the event. You're muted, Mohammed.
Right. Thank you, Muniz. Appreciate it. And thank you all for joining in. We have a good number of participants here, just around 25 people, and that's fantastic. Can you all hear me loud and clear? All right, perfect. So we have a good show for you today. It's a fantastic panel, like Muniz said. We have great speakers and panelists today. We're going to take us through how we really get going with writing an abstracts and nailing down an excellent technical talk. So we will start with some introductions. We'll talk about geothermal rising really briefly, just to make sure that everyone knows what it's all about. And then we'll introduce ourselves as well as the panelists and the topic and why it is important to every single one of us. Now, our two speakers are, I'm starting with Gretchen Gilles, who is going to be talking about how to really start with a good abstract. And that's pretty much the process that will take you to eventually delivering a good paper and presentation at conferences and workshops. Each session, starting with Gilles' session, we'll have a Q&A section right after it. And for Q&A sections, you'll get to ask questions, make comments, and chit-chat a little more with the speaker. Then we'll follow up with Professor Roland Horne on how to give an excellent technical talk. And that kind of builds on having an abstract and then how to really go about presenting your paper at meetings. And this will also be followed up with a Q&A section. Now, after wrapping up the Q&A sections, which will be like 10 minutes for each talk, we will have more time where we get to interact with our speakers, and that's going to be in the form of a panel discussion. We do, as moderators, have questions that we prepped ourselves, and you as well will be given the opportunity to ask any questions that cross your minds. And eventually, or finally, we'll be closing with a couple of announcements from Geothermal Rising side of things, and we'll then close with remarks about future webinars and activities that we're holding. So without further ado, I want to hand it back to Muniz, who's going to tell us more about Geothermal Rising. Muniz, it's yours.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mohammed, for walking us through the agenda. So we're part of the a nonprofit association that is dedicated to advancing the use of geothermal So since we're students, we have a committee dedicated to a group of passionate and talented students from various educational institutions working towards the growth of the geothermal sector. So we collaborate with associations, groups, individuals, industry partners in a joint effort to drive innovation and progress in the geothermal industry. I really appreciate every times during this webinar, we face so many technical issues, so we appreciate your patience and understanding.
All right. Thank you, Muniz. Just a quick intro. Muniz, want to get started and introduce yourself in a more formal manner?
Of course. I'm Horne Salamuti. I'm a PhD candidate of geophysics, and I'm working my second master in energy engineering at the University of the Geothermal Rising Student Committee, and I'm the current president of the Geothermal Mohammed.
Yeah, and this is me, Mohammed Al-Jubran. I'm a doctoral candidate in the Energy Resources Engineering program at the Stanford Doerr School of Sustainability. I work directly with Professor Roland Horne, who we're going to have today. And I also lead the Geothermal Rising Student Chapter Subcommittee. So if you have any questions or comments to us, please always reach out to me. So that's us, and I think it's time to introduce our speakers, and we can get started with Gretchen Gilles by Muniz.
Of course. So I'm honored to introduce her. Gretchen Gilles is a geologist and industry recognized leader with an informed perspective. The recognized in 2022 from LA Energy transition and resilience, innovation, and talent. Gretchen is a senior geological consultant at Aramco Americas in Houston. She began her career as an exploration geologist and later served in a variety of marketing communication roles with Schellenberger. Gretchen is 2022 to 2023 past president of AAPG, standing for American Association of Advisory Council, serving at the Tree Oversight Committee. Gretchen earned a degree in geological science from the University of Texas at Austin. She recently received certification from the Yale School of Management Women on Boards program. Welcome, Gretchen.
Thank you very much. I'm so honored to be here and grateful for your invitation. I think I'm share my screen. Really passionate that most presentations that we go to are 20 or 15 minutes out of our lives that we don't get back. And we want that investment of time to be well worth it. So, and I for committees, and therefore I've read a lot of abstracts. And I've worked with many of my colleagues in Aramco to try to help them write and present really good material. And so starting with the abstract is critical, because if your abstract doesn't get through the reviewers for the conference, you won't be sharing your work. So I'm going to talk about an abstract as a tool that helps you focus your presentation. I think an outline is a very useful tool for you to focus your writing, whether it's an abstract or something else. And I'll give just a couple of comments about turning your abstract into an effective presentation. But clearly, I think Dr. Horne will give us a lot of very useful experience from his perspectives. So I look forward to hearing from him. So first of all, why are we writing abstracts? Probably the least motivating thing is if we are required to do so. My boss tells me I need to present this work. But I think if we have to dig deeper and look for the real reasons, we want to document our results and share the science that we've advanced for posterity. Of course, once you become professionals, presenting your work increases your professional visibility. But another important function of your abstract is to entice people to attend your presentation at a conference. So before we submit the abstract, we should think about, where does this belong? Part of our motivation might be how many people see it, but another part of that is, will the right people see your work? And so it's important to think about that. Sometimes we want feedback, and so presenting to a group of specialists is valuable because they will understand what you're doing and be able to speak with you in detail about it. In other cases, we might just really want to get as much exposure as we can. And so that might be the difference between presenting at, for example, the SPE ATCE, which is a huge conference, or SPWLA, which is also a great conference, but typically a smaller group. Another element of writing an abstract is how you want to make the presentation. If you want lots of exposure, an oral presentation is good. But if you want lots of feedback, a poster lends itself to that, especially if you're in a conference where it really is the physical poster on the wall and you have people standing there talking with you for quite a while. So it's important to think about all of those factors. And then I think a final thing is your abstract or extended abstract or conference paper will sit in the literature somewhere. And you want to make sure that it's easy for the right people to find. Another important part of an abstract is what to put in it. And so certainly the objectives and context of your study is key. The methods of how you're doing your work are important. I think one thing that is overlooked way too often is a description of the data set. How are you drawing your conclusions? And I'll give an example. One time I was really looking forward to a presentation in the area of unconventional resources, because it sounded from the abstract as if the author really had the solution to the challenge of producing from unconventional resources. So imagine my disappointment when I got to the conference, and in the beginning of the speaker's remarks, it became clear that the presentation was simply a literature review. There was nothing new about it. And really, even the integration did not give any new insights. And the abstract led me to believe that that would be the case. So it was actually quite disappointing. Another important part of an abstract is your results and the perceived significance. Sometimes you have conclusions that point to additional problems or work in other disciplines. So all of those things are good to include in an abstract. Of course, it's important to make sure that you have no more words or characters than you're allowed as you summarize the problem and the results. Now, just as there are some things that should be in your abstract, there are a number of things that should not be there. One of them is company or product names, anything that smacks of commercialism. And most conferences make it very clear that they do not want presentations that could be perceived as logos should not appear in your abstract. The next two things have to be included or excluded using your judgment of the audience. If you're speaking to a generalist audience, you may need to actually include a bit of background or introductory material to help them understand what you're talking about. If you're speaking with experts, then you can get right to the point. You don't need to spend any of the word budget in your abstract on that material. Another thing to exclude is remarks for personal or company self-gratification. And by that, I mean things where you're judging or crediting yourself. So saying that something is novel or innovative or best in class or world's first, world's best, those types of expressions can really be annoying to people who really want to understand what is the scientific or engineering accomplishment of your work. A couple more things that are difficult to deal with in abstracts. Unfamiliar abbreviations, and most of the time you can just leave those out and spell the words out in their entirety. References, those don't belong in abstracts, and quotations. So all of those things should be left out of your abstract. In short, your abstract should say what you did, why you did it, how you did it, and what you learned. Okay. I think when you're working on an abstract, writing an outline can be very helpful, even though your abstract is a very short piece of writing. Some people can get by with a really short outline like what I'm showing on the left. For me, a really detailed outline is my tool that I use for most writing. But the abstract, the outline, whatever form you use, should be something that helps you get your work done. And I would say that in terms of writing abstracts for conferences, I've come to really appreciate the format of the SPE, the Society of Petroleum Engineers, because it asks 4 questions, and in writing the abstract, you give 4 responses that pretty much cover all the information that the reviewers need to know to decide whether to accept your abstract for presentation or not. There are a few things that you can do to improve your chances to have your abstract accepted. The first one seems really obvious, but I'm usually startled by people who don't read the conference guidelines. So make sure you read the guidelines, what they're looking for, what the requirements are, and so on. Of course, you should avoid commercialism and trade names. You should avoid having too many words. You should avoid unfamiliar abbreviations or terms. And of course, get rid of spelling and grammatical errors. And I'll tell you a couple of things that reviewers have told me over the years. One noted SPE author told me that if he sees more than 3 typographical errors, he rejects the abstract. Another person told me, and this is a geologist who has worked in petrophysics, he says, if the title is boring, he rejects the abstract. Now, that's pretty brutal, but it's good to know that these people are out there so that we can work more carefully and beat them at their own game. I would also say it's important to get positive attention quickly. And I love this 1-page geological note that was published by AAPG in 1966. And you'll see at the top that it has a short abstract that is written entirely in the passive voice, and it's really pretty boring. A partial biography of the author is given. The inadequate abstract is discussed. Blah, blah, blah. I don't want to read it because it's painful. But if you skip to the bottom, this paper is unusual, not only because it's 1 page, but because it has 2 abstracts. And the better abstract is at the bottom. It says the abstract is of utmost importance, for it is read by 10 to 500 times more people than hear or read the entire article. And the last sentence is important. The abstract should be a condensation and concentration of the essential information in the paper. And I'll take it another step. I think the abstract is also a promise to your potential audience. If you invest your time in coming to my presentation, here's what you're going to learn. And so you really need to make sure that your abstract conveys the criticality of attending your presentation, and that you deliver on the promise. So there are a few things that everybody has to deal with when they're writing an abstract. The first, of course, is who is your audience? And I've already mentioned that if you're speaking with experts or generalists, you write the abstract in different ways because you think about what they know, what words are familiar, and so on. Are you writing for a multidisciplinary or specialist audience? And I think if we're writing for geoscientists and engineers, we write much differently than if we are writing for structural geologists or petrophysicists, which are very specific audiences. Another challenge is maybe our study is incomplete. Now, if you're a student, sometimes you're just on a timeline and you have to take the risk of submitting an abstract when the results are not entirely clear. And I've walked in your shoes and that's difficult. But if you're a professional, there are many opportunities throughout your career to present. And I think it's better form to wait until your study is complete and you can take the time you need to do the job 100% properly. Another challenge for professionals is proprietary information. And lots of companies have secret things that they don't want you to talk about. And that's also a challenge. And then sometimes you're working with trademarked product or service names, and you have to express those generically. Because if you give a presentation that is too commercial, people will be unhappy about that. That's not the purpose of the conference. Now, if you want to talk about how new technology works, that's fine, but be sure to use generic descriptions of whatever the technology is. Now, I've looked at a bunch of different books and publications about writing abstracts and writing papers. And this book, How to Write and Publish a Scientific Paper, is one that I really enjoy. I believe it comes from authors at Texas A&M. And even though I'm a Longhorn, I can acknowledge that this is a good book. I think they may actually be biologists. And the chapters are actually pretty short, a few pages of this and that. One of the discussions that I think is particularly good is ethics of publishing. Sometimes the question comes up, can I submit my abstract to more than one organization at a time? And the answer is no. And this book goes through why you shouldn't do that. But there's so much more there. And I think if you're unfamiliar with the process, this is a great resource. And I know that Dr. Horne is going to talk about giving presentations. I want to talk about just a couple of things. And actually, some of this comes from my experience as an amateur musician. I know people talk about how much they hate speaking in public and how nervous it makes them. So my way of dealing with that as a musician is to think really hard about what it's going to be like. You're up on stage, you have one chance to execute. And so I find it very helpful as I'm practicing to think about what it's going to be like with the audience there. And I've gotten good enough at that I can simulate my knees shaking, my hands shaking, breaking out in a sweat, because I'm so nervous about whether or not I can do this. It makes the actual experience much easier. Another thing is working with people. And sometimes we don't like rehearsing with our colleagues, but that's actually really important because behind closed doors, they can help you work out some of the problems as long as they're willing to give you honest feedback. So you need to find the people who care about you enough that they will be honest. And then I think also imagine yourself being successful. And to me, that's one of the stages of this whole, simulating nervousness. I also think about, wow, that sounded pretty good. I'm going to do a great job. So all of that has helped me over the years confront my nervousness in a variety of situations, in my company, out of my company, and so on. One other thing where I think I've attended enough presentations to have opinions is how people deal with questions. Sometimes we're really eager to jump in and respond, and I think it's very important to let the person ask the question, listen to what they're saying, and then take the time to paraphrase the question. And you do this for a couple of reasons. One is that this helps you gather your thoughts rather than just jumping into a response. And the other is, if you're in a hybrid meeting or in a place where people can't hear the question, you're helping your audience by letting them know what the question actually was. I think one other thing is you are assumed to be the expert about the topic you're presenting, but people cannot expect you to know everything. And I think being comfortable saying, I don't know, or it depends, or something similar is better than attempting to get away with something that you're not confident about. And so I think that's also key to dealing with questions in a credible manner. So I've given you some of my thoughts about abstracts. I'm happy to answer questions, and I look forward to the Q&A and the presentation by Dr. Horne. So I'm going to stop sharing now, and I'm going to see if I can turn my camera on. Yes, okay. There we go. So
yeah, that was
thank you
very
very much
helpful,
for your
and it has
attention.
so many useful information on it. So I know that probably people are going to have more questions at the end of the talk, but I had a quick question for you, Gretchen. I know that some people who are trying to write an abstract for the interdisciplinary field, sometimes they have some struggle because they really don't want to oversimplify what they're writing, but since they have people from different fields, they probably need to make it a way that it would be accessible and understandable to people. So are there any specific tips how to write those type of abstracts?
The topic of writing for a multidisciplinary audience is a great one. And I think one way of thinking about it is speaking to somebody that you know who is, okay, say you're a geologist. I talk to engineers all the time, and they're smart people, but geology has a lot of terms that can be really alienating. I mean, when we get into the rock names, you can see people's eyes glazing over. And so you might want to just talk about a sandstone instead of a quartz arenite, or a sedimentary rock instead of, whatever else. I think you have to kind of step back and put yourself in their shoes, or think about talking to the person next to you on the airplane. Maybe they don't know any of this. And without being condescending, I think we can usually hit on simpler language than what we would say to our faculty advisor or the expert next door.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. So I guess that since now we are right on the track of the time, probably we can start with Dr. Horne, and then later on we can come back to more questions. So let me quickly share my screen. And Mohammed, do you want to introduce Dr. Horne to everybody?
Absolutely. Thank you, Muniz. And thank you, Gretchen, for the great presentation. There's a lot of learnings from there, and we'll definitely get to dive in deeper as we get to the panel discussion. But for now, let's move on to Professor Roland Horne, who we have with us today. And I am having the honor of introducing him. Professor Roland Horne is the Thomas Davis Barrow Professor at Stanford University, and he is a senior fellow in the Precourt Institute for Energy. He holds Bachelor of Engineering, Doctor of Philosophy, and Doctor of Science degrees from the University of Auckland, New Zealand, all in engineering sciences. He is best known for his work in well test interpretation, production optimization, and analysis of fractured reservoirs. So far in his academic career, he has supervised the graduate research of 60 PhD students and 135 master's students. He's an honorary member of the Society of Petroleum Engineers and a member of the U.S. National Academy of Engineering. He served as the 2010-2013 president of the International Geothermal Association, and he was the technical program chair of the World Geothermal Congress in 2005, 10, 15, and 2020. He is a fellow of the School of Engineering at the University of Tokyo and also an honorary professor of China University of Petroleum, East China. Please welcome Professor Horne, and thank you, Professor Horne, for being with us today. You should feel free to share your screen and launch into your presentation.
Very good, thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Good. All right, so thank you for inviting me, and I'm going to take the opportunity here to talk about how to give a good technical talk. So you can see Mohammed there doing exactly that in this opening slide. So what I'm planning to do today is to give you some pointers as to what it needs to give a good technical talk. And of course, the reason that we're all interested in that as students is that technical talks are your lifeblood, not only as graduate students, but when you become graduates, throughout your professional career, you probably give technical talks either in conferences or internal talks inside the company or many things like that. So what I'm planning to do today is to give actually 3 talks, very short, 5 minutes each. First one in the style of an effective speaker, second one in the style of an ineffective speaker, and then I'll take a third presentation, talk about how the two are different and point out some of the things which are ineffective. So let me launch into that. So first of all, a talk which is intended to be effective, and this in fact is actually a real talk, but brief. So the purpose of this talk is to talk about a research project that we're doing in collaboration with Sandia to look at how to analyze fractures in geothermal systems using a chloride-based tool. So enhanced geothermal systems are of interest to all of us, and I'm sure all of you as well. They depend completely on the presence and the suitable location of fractures. And therefore, in order for us to succeed with enhanced geothermal systems, we need to be able to locate the fractures and find out how productive each of them are. So this particular project is taking a somewhat novel approach to doing that, making use of a tool that Sandia developed, which measures the chloride concentration in a wireline tool. So the basis of the measurement you can see in this cartoon, if we have a fracture which is crossing the wellbore, the whole basis of the measurement is a likelihood that the concentration of the dissolved materials, chloride being one of the most common ones found in geothermal fluid, differs from place to place. So the fluid which is flowing up the wellbore and the fluid which enters from the fracture may have different concentrations in chloride. So therefore, if we log the tool with a wireline, we log the well with a wireline tool, we can measure the chloride above, below, and at the entry point. And by doing that, we can do a material balance on the chloride and basically work out what is the flow rate coming in from the fracture. So we achieve 2 things at the same time there. First of all, if we see a change in the chloride concentration, it's indicative that the fracture is there. And then secondly, we can estimate how much the fracture is actually flowing. So here is a picture by the model wellbore in our lab at Stanford. This model wellbore is transparent, and we were into between. So the kind of measurement that we might see, these are the measurements that we took in that wellbore, running into the hole and running out of the hole. You can see, in this case, of course, we know where the fracture actually is, or the feed zone, and you an indication that it passes that feed zone. And because we only have one opportunity to do that in the lab, ratio calculated in a numerical model, and it also shows that same increment of chloride concentration as we pass by that feed zone. So in conclusion then, for this brief talk, our lab, the numerical simulations by which we were able to expand on the lab experiments also agreed with that and allowed us to consider other configurations that we couldn't represent in the lab. For example, a more realistic fracture rather than just a port. One of the things we did find was that the measurement in the middle of the well is not exactly what is actually coming in through the fracture. However, we determined that it should be possible to calibrate so that we can actually measure that correctly. It will actually be to take the physical based on I'll give you something like a similar talk, not as effectively. And I should point out here, although the first talk I gave you was completely the truth, in order actually truth. Okay, so I'm going to talk now about this paper, and I want to show you the development update on the chloride-based inflow measurement in fractured enhanced geothermal systems wells. And the paper is by Ludvan Havitsa, Judah Wazastra, Sarah Sausan, Chan Chung Su, and myself. Talk about some of the results that we saw, and then I'll reach some kind of a conclusion. So the reason that we're interested in all of this is because we have increasing carbon dioxide concentration of greenhouse gas in the world, giving rise to much greater concentrations than we've ever seen in the past, ultimately reaching to climate change. So that's the reason we're interested in renewable energies, including ultimately then geothermal. So all of that is the reason why we want to do this study that we're talking about. Okay, and what I'm showing you here is a graph which compares the y-axis to the x-axis. The whole basis of this is that when we're measuring gravity and centrifuge, it changes the germination of plants, and the rate at which the plants grow then depends on how much gravity is actually present. Okay, and here's some results. So first of all, to state the obvious, when we put more thermal energy in, it gets hotter, and as temperature rises up, the wellbore itself gets hotter too. And we did an experiment in July, and when we had the flow in the RBS greater than the TQR, we didn't see the same result, although they weren't connected by a PQC because we hadn't got the LMQ working. So actually the results I'm showing you aren't really appropriate at all, but I'm showing you anyway, and maybe we'll fix that sometime in the future. And here's a slide which talks about the mathematical model that governs the flow in the configuration I showed you, with fractures coming in and out. The properties of the reservoir that we're modeling are shown in this table in the middle. We've got an equation for the advection dispersion. We've got an equation for the heat transfer, and actually I'm out of time, so I don't have time to talk about what's in this slide. Are there any questions? Okay, so let me come through to some of the differences between these two different styles of talks. And obviously I've kind of overstated the bad things in the second one. So first of all, coming back to the original presentation slide, the difference between the two slides you can see is in the complexity. This is very similar to what you heard from Gretchen talk about abstracts. You want to focus on what it is that the people have to understand about what you're going to say. And although it may seem kind of cute to put little pictures of the experiment and what we're going to show, they're a distraction in what we have to say. There's no reason necessary to read all of the title and the authors. We may want to give emphasis of the co-authors. I usually do that, although I didn't today because I was just trying to do a 5-minute talk. So just to make a point of the general philosophy, since we're on the title slide, the whole basis and the whole structure of the talk that you're going to give is a story that you are telling to the audience. One of the most important things you want to do when you begin the story, as I did in my original talk, is to explain why what you're going to say is of value to the audience. Because you're not there to give a talk for your own benefit. You're there to give a talk for the benefit of the audience. So even though you're hoping that it may advance your career, the whole purpose for the audience to be sitting there is because they're hoping that they may find something of technical value that they can use in their daily job. So everything that you say should be focused on what it's going to be of importance to the audience, or what they need to understand about what you did. Okay, so then second slide I showed you, this one is an outline. It's not uncommon to actually show an outline slide, although I quite often don't. And one of the reasons why is because an outline of almost 90% of talks that you're going to hear are exactly the same list that I've made right here, introduction, motivation, etc. All talks say that, and therefore it's just wasting time to go through all of those items. So in many cases, an outline is superfluous unless there's something specifically you want to draw attention to that, as I did in my overall talk. First, I'm going to give a good talk, then I'm going to give a bad talk. That's something that shows people what's going to happen. Now, in terms of the slide itself, this is using a kind of old-fashioned blue background. We used to do that a lot when we had 35mm slides. However, that's no longer the case. With electronic projectors, the slides are much more effective with a white background, and the dark background just darkens the room and makes everybody fall asleep. Thirdly, there's a whole mishmash of colors in this slide, so we don't want that. Again, that's a distraction. I've got 5 different fonts, and I've got a lot of superfluous animations, which basically tend to distract from actually what I'm talking about. In terms of animations, I know that people like to use them. It kind of feels cute to have things zooming in from left and right, etc. But most of the time, that's not effective. There are occasions when you want to build a story, so you show a diagram with one result, and then you bring in a second result for contrast. That can be useful, but a lot of the time the animations don't serve any technical purpose. And let me remind you what I said a few minutes ago. You're there for the benefit of the audience. If the animations don't help them, then they should not be there. And then over here on the right, I've got some irrelevant pictures. Having pictures on your slide is actually a good thing because it makes it more interesting. It's otherwise just plain boring text. However, the icons have to mean something. Otherwise, they're a distraction. Everybody's sitting there thinking, well, what have penguins got to do with geothermal wells? And why are they there? Instead of listening to what you have to say. Okay, now my second slide or third slide in the second talk was this one. And I'm talking about climate change and hockey stick, etc. Now, obviously, that is completely superfluous because all of you know exactly everything which is already on this slide. I'm talking to an audience which is interested in energy, which is experienced in energy, and therefore I am just wasting time by showing this slide. And the result of that was I wasted time on this slide in my introduction. I didn't have enough time to talk about the actual material. So as Gretchen said too, when she was talking about abstracts, you have to understand the audience you're speaking to. If I was talking to, maybe a high school class or, the Rotary Club or something like that, I might use a slide like this that emphasizes, climate change means geothermal means what I'm going to talk about. But for you in this audience, I have no reason to talk about this, and I should not waste my time talking about that. And this slide, which I'm sure, I'm sorry if anybody is feeling sick looking at this. Be careful with your colors. Actually, this is not, we used to see a lot of slides like this in meetings 10, 20 years ago. Nowadays, PowerPoint tends to stop you from making horrible slides like this. But sometimes people manage to make horrible slides anyway. So you need to be careful with your colors. There are very few colors that really work well in a PowerPoint presentation. And I've listed my favorites there: black, white, red, and blue. And if you can make a presentation which only needs 4, which many of them can, those are good ones to use. And you're looking for contrast. Black text on a white background with red and blue for emphasis is not only adequate, it's clearer in many cases. Now, another thing about this particular slide is it's got a whole bunch of text on it. And we should talk about that for a moment, because you need to think about why is text on a slide. And I draw attention to something I said before. The presentation is not for you, for your benefits, for the benefit of the audience. So anything which is written on this slide should be there for the benefit of the audience. If there's something that you want them to read, you can put it on the slide, nothing wrong with that. But if it's something that you're going to say, you may just put an encapsulated version of it just to kind of cement the idea in their head. It's a very abbreviated version of the text. And then finally, the graph at the bottom is very spidery. This, for those of you who use MATLAB or Python, is something that happens a lot, even nowadays in slides, because what looks good in a paper, you copy the diagram out of the paper, put it on the slide, the lines are often too fine in the slide compared to the way that they look in the paper. So if you're using Excel, for example, it's not difficult to thicken the lines so that they have greater emphasis. But if you're just cutting something straight out of MATLAB, then you end up with these very spidery looking graphs, which have font which is too small, so people can't read what the axes are, and they can't tell one line from another. So if I take that same slide, first of all, I change the colors to make it a lot clearer. I also abbreviated the text to kind of make a précis of what it was going to say. And then the diagram at the bottom, if you actually have a MATLAB slide or something like that, you can overwrite it, just sort of make a line over it to actually make the line thicker. It makes it much clearer. And you can also add text boxes so that the axis captions are readable as well. So you don't have to use the slide just because it's there in the paper. You can actually decorate it somewhat to make it clearer for the people who want to read it. Okay, we came to this results slide. So again, this is something that Gretchen mentioned. If someone who is reading your abstract or watching your presentation. I personally am one of these people completely. The first time I see a spelling mistake or a random capitalization, I basically stop listening to what the person is saying, and I'm looking at the grammatical errors on the slide instead. Random capitalization is kind of annoying. Everybody's wondering why that particular word is more important than the others. And most of the time, actually, that is not an emphasis that was even intended in the first place. The text on this slide is very small. So, for the most part, if there's something that you want people to read, you should make it big enough that they could read it. Colors, of course, in this slide also wrong, as I showed it before. And then thirdly, you can see all of these TLAs, 3-letter abbreviations. And although you've been working on this subject for 6 months or a year or whatever, and you know exactly what all of these 3-letter abbreviations are, the person who's sitting in the audience is seeing it for the first time. And even though you may have defined it 2 slides back, they've already forgotten what it means. Or maybe there's somebody who comes from a different audience. You're an engineer and the audience has some geologists and they don't know what RBSs and TQRs, etc. are. And then finally, the diagrams on the right-hand side are just like I was talking about before. They're very small, they're very spidery. The text is very small, so you can't see it. And it's not very clear what it is that we wanted to say in this particular slide. So taking the same information, I've made these diagrams now much bigger so we can actually see what they're saying. I don't have to have text on the slide at all. I can make the points I wanted to make. And in this particular case too, I have decorated the diagrams by, first of all, adding text. One on the left is a low case and the one on the right is a high case. And then I put arrows and annotations on to draw attention to, of the many lines that are on the graph, the ones that we want the audience to actually pay attention to. The blue one represents well when it's flowing, and the red one represents the geothermal gradient. That's what it is that the audience is supposed to see in this slide, and that's what I would be talking about as I was giving the presentation. Okay, and this is actually a slide that I took from somebody's talk that presented at the Stanford Geothermal Workshop, but I would emphasize I actually added a few things to it, although not very many. So this is a terrible slide because it's got so much information on it. It's completely overpowering. It's not clear at all exactly what the audience is supposed to understand from it or what they should be paying attention to. It's sometimes said that you should never put equations in slides, and I don't accept that at all. I think there's certainly reasons to include equations in slides, as long as there's a reason for them to be there, and as long as there's a reason, something that explains what you are doing or something which is meaningful to the audience. But you need to focus on exactly that, what's important. So all of the information was in here. I might choose to separate into 2 slides. First of all, showing the equations which are relevant and pointing out what is distinct about these equations that I want the audience to understand, is that these equations have fractional derivatives, and that's what we use to describe the model. And then the other part of the slide, shows the physical representation of what the equations represent, and the table shows the values of the models that we used. Putting a table in a PowerPoint slide is often not a good thing to do. And it's certainly not a good thing to read through every number on the slide. But sometimes if you're talking about a model and there's people in the audience are thinking, well, is this a high permeability case or is it a low permeability case? They can actually scan through the numbers on the table to understand that if it's meaningful to them. Okay, and then finally, a few points, sort of general points in closing that I made as I opened. You're telling a story to the audience, and you want to make sure the story has a beginning, a middle, and also an end. You've got to make sure that the audience understands at the end where it came to. Another general observation I would make as you move through your talk is to don't just have a stream of talking for 20 minutes or however long you're allowed. Divide the talk up into chapters and make it clear to the audience, okay, now we've finished talking about the laboratory model, and now we're going to talk about the numerical model. And I find it useful, as I've done in this particular slide you see in the background, to actually use numbers. We've moved from topic number 1, which was the laboratory model. Now we're talking topic number 2, which is the mathematical model. And that gives the audience a sense of where they are in the presentation. Some physical pointers. This is not something I can actually show you because I'm not physically present. Most of the time nowadays, you'll be giving a presentation to an audience with a laptop in front of you, which allows you to see the slide that they are looking at. I encourage you to remind yourself from the laptop what the slide is about, but other than that, basically talk to the audience by looking at them face to face. Don't turn around and look at the screen behind you, because if you do that, you're basically turning your head away from the audience. You're turning sometimes your mouth away from the microphone, and it doesn't have the same kind of interaction as you would have if you're facing the audience and speaking to them, person to person. And then finally, laser pointers. Don't slash around with a laser pointer, marking this and marking that. Laser pointers are useful. Sometimes you want to draw attention to something, but other than the time that you point to that point on the graph and say, okay, this is the maximum temperature that we reached. If there's not something that you actually have to draw their attention to, you should not be pointing the laser pointer on at all. And you shouldn't be waving it around, because your audience gets sick and they get distracted from what it is that they're supposed to be listening to. And I will close with a couple of sort of sidetracks here. One of the things I encourage you to do if you're making PowerPoint presentations is to learn the keyboard shortcuts. So instead of hunting around trying to find the icon that says begin the presentation or wherever it might be, at least on Windows machines, if you hit the F5 key, it will go immediately into presentation mode. If you happen to be starting halfway through, if you use Shift F5, it starts from whatever slide that you're at. And again, if you're taking questions, somebody may say, well, on slide number 11, you said such and such, can we have a look at it? And then you stop the presentation, you go up and down, you're looking for slide number 11. It takes a lot of time. But if I just go 1, enter, that takes me to slide number 11. And the slide I was on was 33. I'll type 3, enter, and it takes me back. So you can go backwards and forwards in the presentation by just putting the slide number followed by enter, which emphasizes another important point, by the way, which is that your slides should all have numbers on, so that if somebody wants to ask a question about slide number 11, they can mark it down as you're speaking. And then finally, there's these two keys, B and W. If I press B, it makes the screen black. And if I press W, it makes it white. So if you, for example, want to stop and talk about something else, you may want to blank the screen so that the audience can just look at you while you're describing something, not to be distracted by words which are on the screen. So with that, I will conclude and thank you for your attention.
All right, awesome. Well, thanks a lot, Professor Horne. I see a lot of those tips here and mistakes that I see and personally fall into myself. So it's really good to learn all about this. We do have quite a bit of questions, so I will just pick one of those and ask it right now. So one of them says, what are the best ways to handle challenging questions and discussions during a technical presentation?
Okay, I guess that's the question for me. So a couple of important things about that. So you're the expert, so hopefully you would actually know the answer to the question, so there won't be too many challenging questions. But sometimes, let me take the word exactly as you said it, sometimes you will be challenged in the presentation. Somebody said, this is the biggest bunch of rubbish I ever heard in my life, and I don't know how you can hold your head up as an engineer, and the SB or the GRC should throw you off the stage. Very occasionally you may get an aggressive question like that. You should never engage in a question like that. You just say, well, thank you very much for your comment. Next question. Okay. Having a question like that says much more about the questioner than it's ever going to say about you, and the audience will get that. So you shouldn't sort of fight back and be defensive, etc. You just move on, and the rest of the audience is thinking, well, what an asshole that guy is, and that'll be the end of it. Coming to the point that Gretchen made, sometimes you get answered a question to which you don't know the answer, and you just say, well, I don't know. Sorry, we haven't thought about that yet, but it's a good suggestion. Thank you very much, and go on to it. Another important point that I would make, which I'm actually not following myself right now, sometimes the answer to the question is yes. And if that's the answer, just say yes. There are many people who are going to want to be asking you questions. You don't want to waste a lot of time saying yes, and that's because on slide 11 we showed this and that. If the answer is a simple answer, just give a simple answer.
Muniz, I think you are on mute.
Thank you so much, Mohammed. So I guess that now we can go back to the panels. So since that Dr. Horne and Gretchen both gave their presentation, I guess that we can start asking the question from both of our panelists. And I see some Q&A question in the chat and also chat box, so we can get to them as well. So I personally, I'm going to start with Gretchen. Many presenters, specifically the students, usually have so much nervousness before giving the presentation. So you believe how we can, as a student or even as a presenter, how we can manage our nervousness and maintain confidence during a technical presentation?
So I gave some suggestions earlier about what I have done in the past. I think there's no substitute for practice. And I would emphasize the getting started part of it. You really have to be prepared with the beginning of it, because once you get into it, your nerves are going to go away and you will focus on your topic. But you need to make sure to get through the first few slides without taking too much time. And I think getting to a comfortable pace so that you don't either rush the whole thing or take too long in the first few slides is critically important. And so I think that's where you find out who your friends are, practicing with them, recording yourself, timing yourself as many times as you think you need. I would say make sure you take physical care of yourself. Some of my friends who are professional musicians and so on have said, and it's almost like being an athlete, eat a banana so you have enough potassium in your system, drink plenty of water, wear clothes that make you feel good, nothing too tight, nothing, make yourself as comfortable as you can. And then I think one other thing, I have never had to give a presentation in anything other than my native language. And I'm very sympathetic and in awe of people who routinely do this. Now, I remember recently seeing a presenter who was extremely nervous about presenting in English. And I noticed that he actually had a small notebook hidden on the podium in the laptop. And make sure it doesn't depress any keys or anything like that. But he had a lot of notes there that he was able to refer to while he was speaking. Now, I think it risks sounding a little bit unnatural, but if your alternatives are paralysis or not getting through your talk, you have to find some coping mechanism to get through it.
Mohammed?
Yeah, I'll jump in and ask a question here. I think we got a couple questions here in the Q&A chat, and I had that same question in mind, which is on how to keep up with when the audience are not really paying much attention to you, and somehow you want to turn tables and get them into it. Roland or Gretchen, you feel free to take on that. It's a little tricky, maybe.
You see politicians do this all the time, because they're of course much more professional speakers than we are. The point of punctuating the talk, which is the point that I made as I was going along, is quite useful sometimes to kind of draw people back into track. If you're talking continuously for 20 minutes without stopping, people do get distracted. So you need some kind of texture in your talk, which is admittedly hard to do because you really want to say what you want to say, but sometimes you just kind of stop. And when you stop like that, everybody wakes up, say, well, what happened, And you say, or you can say, now look at that. And that actually will kind of bring in some sort of crescent or peak in the timbre of the presentation and bring people's attention back. And it is the reason why you want to avoid talking in monotone, talking continuously, not drawing breath between slides, actually kind of texture your talk so that people don't get distracted and wander off thinking about politics or something else while you're speaking.
Yeah, I think that's all excellent advice. And I'll add one more thing, which is even if you are in a situation where you have to read something, reading a speech, reading a presentation, part of your job is to make sure that you read in a way that gives emphasis to important points and keeps people engaged. If the audience is small enough, another thing is to look at them. Now, this is where I have fun as an instructor. If you see somebody asleep and you can walk over to them and stand by them, they wake up pretty quickly. We can't always do that with an audience at a conference, but it's a nice fantasy.
So I have a question for both of our panelists because both of them gave so many talks, and I wondered, can you share with us like any experience that you had in the past, that unexpected thing happened when you're giving your technical talk, and how did you manage that?
Actually, I'll talk about something I witnessed just as a cautionary tale. I went to a panel discussion last year at a major event, and all the panelists had microphones with the cords through their shirt and everything. And it turned out that the microphones were mostly terrible, and they wound up handing off one microphone to the different people. Now, as that was going on, the moderator of the panel basically took the script and threw it aside. And so the whole thing was completely random compared to the preparation that these folks put into it. We can't always plan for disaster, but I think making sure that you remember what are the key points that I want to talk about, even if the whole thing is going up in flames around you, is what do I want these people to know? And so that actually leads to one other thing that I meant to talk about, which is you are telling a story, and I would put the emphasis on a story, one story. If you have too many unrelated conclusions, it's probably too complicated. So I think, focus on what it is you're trying to get across, even if everything falls apart around you.
Yeah, I think I'd echo that point completely. That's a point I should have made, but Gretchen's now reminding me that I forgot to make it. The presentation is about, usually you'll make a presentation about a paper, at least at a conference. The paper and the presentation don't have to be the same. Of course, they're about the same topic, but there are things that are in the paper that you don't have to say in your 15-minute allocation. You can distill it down to the fine points. Okay, there's 27 things in the paper, but these 5 things in sequence actually are what's important. I don't think I have any particularly momentous stories to tell about things that happened to me, but I've certainly seen a few things happen to other speakers, some of whom handled it well and some of it not so well. One of the things to think about, some of the questions that have come up here a couple of times about being nervous. And it's important to emphasize, I'm always nervous before I give a presentation. It's the same for everybody, even though I've done it hundreds of, maybe even thousands of times. One of the things that I think is important is to, just to remind yourself, okay, if you totally fluff this presentation, the world is not going to end. Okay, your mother and father are still going to love you, and it won't actually make as big a difference as you might imagine, unless it's an exam. But a lot of worse things can happen than a messed up presentation. So that's the thing to bear in mind, first of all. And then secondly, when things really do get messed up outside of your control, like a power cut, that's happened to me too. A power cut, 5 minutes into the presentation, all the lights go out, all the PowerPoints go down, etc. You can recover from that if you know the story that you're trying to tell. So, I mean, you've got 5 things that you want to say. Sure, it would have been nice to have a graph, but if you understood what it is that the audience really need to know about the study that you're talking about or whatever it is, you can actually tell that story sometimes without slides. Perhaps not in the dark, but anyway, and slides might be missing, or who knows what may be different. Someone who is able to just get past that is a person who's a really good speaker, and someone who freezes when that happens is not such a good speaker.
Well, thank you both. I think we have time for another 1 or 2 questions. So I want to ask about what steps you guys would, or you two would take after giving a technical talk to keep your audience engaged.
Gretchen?
To keep the audience engaged after the presentation?
Yeah, in case you are interested in maybe them, following up or getting you connected to other projects kind of related to what you do.
Well, so that's a really great point. It's good if the presentation actually leads to other things. And that would be one reason why I would advocate in favor of poster sessions, because in the the hard copy on the wall situation, you actually get to speak to people at some length. You can exchange business cards easily, and or whatever. And I think if you're looking for that sort of feedback and opportunity, a poster session is really great. It bothers me that people treat posters as kind of second-class citizens, because I think for certain things they can be enormously helpful. Certainly staying after the session to talk to people, to thank the session chairs, to thank the reviewers, to thank the other speakers and congratulate them, and to meet the people who are there is an obvious step to keeping some engagement. If you have an opportunity to publish again, that's terrific. If you meet people who are in the business of reviewing grants in that area, that's another opportunity. So I think I wouldn't be in a hurry to leave the auditorium.
Yes, I was going to say something very similar. So the thing to bear in mind about a conference, so most of the presentations you'll be making are in a conference, is that it's not something that you attend just to deliver your talk and then leave. You see people do that sometimes, but that's not the greatest advantage that there is in attending a conference. You're actually there to confer with other people, and therefore there's a lot to learn by sticking around. Hopefully a well-designed session actually has other papers which are related to yours, people who are interested in what you had to say as well as others had to say. So number one, I would say make sure you listen to what other people have to say in your session. It's kind of hard to do when you're thinking about what you're going to say or what you should have said. But if you pay attention to what else is going on, then you have a conversation to start after your presentation is done, maybe with somebody from the audience, it may be with another speaker, and that's a discussion that you could have. But in terms of the direction that perhaps Mohammed is leading us in, it's not just you delivering something. Okay, when somebody comes to ask you a question, you should be, interested about why they're asking you that question, or how could it be of advantage to them, or how what you did might be useful, in their career or in their company or something like that. So it's a two-way interaction at a conference.
Yeah, and I guess since we have time for one more question, so I'm going to ask both of you again, because my previous question was about if you had any bad experience and how did you manage that. So now my last question is that, have you recently participated or attended any event or any talk that you found the talk very memorable and good, and what actually in that talk made it very memorable for you?
I'll jump in. I had a wonderful opportunity to attend Sarah Week, which is sometimes described as the Super Bowl of energy. And that was one conference where I focused more on the content than how it was delivered, and often the excitement of the people to be there. And I think it was a place where everything was curated to such a high level that everything was interesting. I could sit there for 12 hours a day through these long events, listening to really interesting people with different perspectives. And so going to a conference of that quality was really terrific. And the flip side of that is, as Dr. Horne was going through the bad presentation, what was going through my mind is, if you go to enough conferences, you will see all of those slides. So I think we just have to keep hoping. And so I'd say get involved in organizing conferences, because then you play a role in the quality of what's going to be there, and get people involved. And I'd really encourage you to get on conference committees, not only because if you're an abstract reviewer, you kind of see the new stuff that's coming, but also because you play a direct role in the quality of what you're about to spend a few days on.
Yes, I would say, in terms of, very positive experiences, it's happened to me on perhaps only 2 or 3 occasions, giving a presentation, in most cases because the student who would have given a presentation couldn't go because they had to go back to their home country or whatever. But a student who had done something that was completely new and completely different, and more than that, it was revolutionary. It was something that was really going to be good for the audience, and to be, to stand up in front of the audience and know that you're going to tell them something that's going to blow them away. That's a very, very exciting thing to do.
Well, that's great. That's fantastic. Really good discussion. We had a lot of fun. We learned a lot. And we would really like to thank you both, Gretchen, Gilles, and Professor Roland Horne, for being with us. And as we move towards closing this webinar, we'd like to make a few final announcements about the different activities and events that we're holding. And here we go. Next slide. Perfect. Yeah. So you have this upcoming opportunity, which is on the 2023 Geothermal Rising Student Paper Contest. We held it last year for the first time, and this is the second version of it. Last year it was involving monetary prizes, and this year it'll be involving more than that. There is money still, and then there's going to be 3 articles that are going to get published in the Geothermal Rising Bulletin. And of course, participants or winners will receive certificates of achievement. And most importantly, there's going to be significant recognition to the winners and all platforms related to geothermal rising who are being looked at and seen by industry experts and renowned names like our guest today on social media. So the deadline for this was on July 7th, and it has recently been extended to July 31st. And it is open for all levels, as long as you're a student, being an undergrad during your bachelor's or doing your master's or PhD, then you do qualify. And the winners will come from different divisions, meaning that they're going to be winners from undergrad, master's, and PhD. So don't feel a little intimidated if you happen to be, bachelor's, given that PhDs are participating. There are awards that are specifically given to undergrads. So feel encouraged. We're trying to have you on board. You still have another 10 days to go. And if you have any questions, you can always reach out to us. Now, there's the registration form, which is this QR code. It'll take you to an application form. And all you need to do is fill out some information about yourself and then submit some kind of ID to show that you're a student. And finally, submit your extended abstract, which could be anything up to 200, up to 2 pages, I apologize. And more details are in the form itself. If you have any questions, you can always reach out to us. And as a matter of fact, we have contact information in the following slide. So we have the full board here to the left. You see everyone in there. You probably know some familiar faces, and you can find us all on social media. You can reach out via email, or you can use your favorite social media platform, be it LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, or Twitter. And with this, I would like to conclude and thank our speakers once again, and thank all who joined this webinar. And we hopefully would love to see you again in the upcoming webinars that we will announce in the coming few weeks. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye-bye.